I study fish all over the world, but I concentrate on Africa. I study the freshwater fishes of Africa, and I try to understand their relationships and their evolution. I have a strong feeling that if Charles Darwin had stumbled on the African Great Lakes, he wouldn't have waited 30 years to publish his great theory of natural selection. It's almost as if evolution is on steroids in these lakes. There are literally hundreds of species, all of which have evolved in the lakes, and they're continuing to evolve today.
Darwin's Orchid book represents a milestone in the history of biology because it was this book that he described in exquisite detail the coevolution of plants and their pollinators. Darwin's research has forced us to think about the functional basis of this wonderful diversity that we see in flowering plants, the shape, the color, the scent of flowers. Today, my lab is looking at what the evolutionary forces are that have caused this diversity.
The focus of my research is the evolutionary history of insects. Insects are the most diverse life form on Earth. And contrary to popular belief, they actually have a pretty good fossil record. The most impressive part of which is their preservation in amber, or fossil resin. Amber was formed from resin that oozed out of trees, and when it was still sticky, insects and other small life forms became embalmed in the amber, and it preserved them with a lifelike fidelity. The detailed preservation allows us to reconstruct evolutionary relationships very precisely, better than for any other kind of fossils.
Homology means shared similarity or shared characteristics of organisms, shared because of common ancestry. I study fossil marine reptiles, and the skeleton of these marine reptiles is more closely comparable to embryos or early hatchlings. So I turn to embryonic development to better understand the structures that I study in the fossils.
Evolution happens relatively rapidly. New species can arise sometimes in just a few thousands of years. And this is what we see as the norm in the evolution of life, not these long, slow, steady periods of change that Darwin had predicted. My practical examples are drawn from the world of trilobites, which are an extinct group of arthropods, so they're related to crabs and shrimp and flies and so forth. They actually look like animals. They've got eyes, they've got bodies, and they're very complicated. So the complex anatomy gives you a chance of detecting evolutionary change.
Everything that you see in the history of trilobites is consistent with evolution by natural selection. If it wasn't for the theory of evolution, all I would have would be a succession of unrelated facts. But the idea of evolution enables me to organize the trilobites, to understand how one trilobite evolved into another, to understand their radiation and their eventual decline. I would be lost without evolutionary theory.
What's amazing to me about Darwin is that he had the courage to ask whether life had been that way for all of time or whether it evolved from some previous state. That kind of question we now take for granted. I ask, what is the history of the Earth? What is the history of our galaxy? What's the history of the universe? Darwin transformed the enterprise of science from one where people were perfectly content just describing objects and phenomena around them, to one where the interrelationships among these objects and phenomena became what was interesting. That is not only the evolution of objects being studied, it's the evolution of science itself.